Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit, the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes. Okay, now let's get on with the show. Hello everyone and welcome to the Alternative Exit. Today, we've got a guest who is a powerhouse in employee ownership and impact entrepreneurship. Mike Brady has had a really varied resume to be able to provide and enabled him to provide impact across all areas of sort of business, social impact, and also employee ownership. He started his career in strategy at PwC, moved into tech and had an exit with Fast, then moved to be CEO of Greyston Bakery, where he pioneered this award-winning open hiring model, which I'll put a link to his TED Talk about that in the show notes. And currently, as we're moving more into that employee ownership space, he's the co-founder of 40 Million Owners, which I'm sure we're going to hear about more today, which his mission is to scale employee ownership across the US, and also serves as an operating partner in Southeast Acquisition Capital, and he sort of looks after the food and beverage sort of parts of the business as the operating partner there. So, Mike, welcome to the Alternative Exit.
Andy, so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's absolutely fantastic. So you've obviously had a really sort of varied career, and obviously when coming out of consulting tech into impact, right? What took you? What was the piece that sort of made you drive towards that sort of lens of impact at your work at Greyston Bakery?
Yeah, thank you, Andy, and let me just throw some kudos your way for having this podcast and believing in the future of employee ownership and bringing on so many talented people that are moving this forward. I'm grateful to be part of it, and I think there's some amazing things in front of us, but not without folks like you that are trying to get the story out there and move the needle. It's really tremendous work. So, with that said, at one point, we went through my background. I appreciate that, and it's generous. Yes, it's quite varied. I like to think of myself as a bit of a multi-sector expert, but I also just am curious, kind of always looking to learn. And at one point, after getting an MBA and having an opportunity to have a small exit, I was able to pause and think about, what is it that I might want to spend the 12, 14, 18 hours a day doing that could move the needle. And it just kind of pushed me towards business as a force for good. And back at that time, B Corps in the US and actually globally were gaining a lot of traction, and people were thinking differently about it. And as life is at times, you just get fortunate in who you meet and how you meet them. And my kind of journey to Greyston was driven by an amazing woman who happened to be my wife, and has supported me on my work the entire time. And we both volunteered at Greyston because we loved the mission. Yeah, exactly. Okay. We had heard about this amazing bakery in Yonkers, New York, which we were living in Manhattan at the time. And it was driving social change through entrepreneurship. And we wanted to get involved in some community work. And we both went up there and we volunteered. And kind of one thing led to another. I had seen an opportunity to drive some change there and approached the board and said, I think there's some real opportunity to take this to another level. And we agreed, and I ended up becoming the CEO of this amazing social enterprise.
That's super cool. I love that. The part I love about that story is you made a suggestion and then you had to follow through.
Indeed. You put something out there, and then you're kind of stuck following through with it. So it's
which is I find that's a big rarity in the volunteering space. A lot of the times, it's very very high on suggestions.
Yeah, it turned out to be one of those opportunities that you hope to have in your career, where you're learning every day, but also exposed to stuff that you may not have known about, and a lot of that was around social change and social impact. And I found myself reasonably quickly becoming a workforce development kind of leader, talking about what inclusive hiring was and where shortcomings were in our systems. And it was amazing, not only because those issues really need to be addressed, not only in the US, but globally. But I was working with some amazing entrepreneurs. Bernie Glassman is a Zen master who started Greyston and had these principles of non-judgment and loving action and interdependence. And he created this culture at Greyston through inclusive hiring that I think is what we talk about when we think about an ownership culture. But people who are accountable and in believing in one another to make the organization better. And Bernie never stopped thinking about how to drive impact and make both a business successful and impact in the community. And this is back in the 80s that he started this.
Wow.
He was a pioneer, and Greyston's longevity is a tribute to Bernie's entrepreneurism. But then just the other part of that work for me is we were working alongside other amazing organizations like Ben and Jerry's, who have for long, also decades been moving the needle on what it means to combine business and social impact. And then Unilever, who had owned Ben and Jerry's at the time, really believed in our model. And I was able to align with Paul Pullman and his work on the sustainable living plan and really be a player within a supply chain that has, many thousands of different suppliers, but we were doing something unique and it was a business advantage.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It turned into a business advantage as well, which sort of fueled more growth, created more opportunities. I love that sort of virtuous loop.
Yeah, completely. So and when I talk to social entrepreneurs, that is what we need to be sure we're highlighting. People care. Making impact, making a difference, and we'll get into it. But employee ownership is all about that as well.
So, mate, with that sort of experience, and like when you talk about like workforce development, like that's. And the work that you were doing with obviously the open hiring policy could have taken you any number of directions to be able to go and drive more impact. Why did you then choose employee ownership as an area that you'd like to focus?
Yeah, it was a process over the years of realizing that there are some shortcomings to the workforce development space, right? And people that have their careers in it will appreciate this as well. And it's providing people access to a job can be life-changing, but it may not be system-changing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that work in workforce development, at times it's referred to the industrial complex, where billions of dollars are put towards particular workforce development programs, but few actually make it to the team members and doesn't move the needle when they may be getting into low wage or what could be considered a living wage job. And in 2021, Aspen Institute, which is an incredible global organization doing work around social impact, did a reasonably great explanation around, hey, there are a lot of jobs that people could take, but very few quality jobs. And I began to see that as well. And I began to be a big believer that we needed to put some systems of wealth accumulation and asset ownership into the models. And it led me down a path of searching for that. And kind of the other part of it is Greyston's model is what's referred to in some ways as an alternative ownership enterprise. It was owned by a 501c3, although the bakery was a for-profit bakery. It was the first benefit corp in New York State, which was a great accomplishment for us. But it didn't provide the wealth building opportunity. And the nonprofit structure also limited our ability to be creative with financing. And I think the combination of how you can bring new capital into a market and think about social impacts and social innovation is the way we're going to move the needle. And it's now led me into employee ownership because I just see a tremendous opportunity. And, the silver tsunami is going to happen no matter what. It's who at the end of the day is going to benefit from it, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. A lot of the times we talk about that. Well, the silver tsunami is obviously something I talk about a lot, and all the guests sort of talk about. And I think, but one part is really, really clear is that there aren't enough buyers for these businesses, But they're not enough for all these businesses that are going to be coming on the market. What do you see? What do you see is going to happen if these businesses don't find a buyer?
I mean, there'll be a spectrum, of course, right? There will be those that have to sell or are able to sell, but not at the price point that may be worthy of what they should be getting, because there's going to be too much. There'll be oversupply.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, there'll be businesses that could continue for decades more, but will close because a new leader won't be found or the structure and succession won't happen. And these are exactly the types of solutions or situations that could be resolved with an employee ownership
yeah.
structure and model, and can make lasting impact in communities for decades.
Yeah. Yeah, it's for me, every time sort of I sit there and listen to sort of smart people like you talking about what the potential opportunities are with employee ownership and why, and how it can solve it. Amazing how it can solve such a huge problem that's going to be happening. It's amazing how few people are speaking about it. Which is,
I agree. I'll introduce something else about the silver tsunami that doesn't really come up in the EO circles as much. It does come up in workforce development quite a bit. It's not just about the business owners; it's about the workers, the retiring workers, and
yeah,
who's going to be doing the jobs. And employee ownership is going to play a key role there, because if you're going to consider joining an HVAC business, would you rather join one that's employee owned, or would you join one that you're just a worker? And in the future, fingers crossed, when employee ownership becomes more mainstream and there's a lot more businesses within a community, and you're earlier in your career and can make those choices, you're going to move to those businesses that are employee owned, and the others will be able to grow. There is not going to be enough workers. And that is also a fact. There is going to be a labor shortage in the U.S. You can tell me in Europe how they talk about it, but it's a certainty, and competing more effectively for team members. And that's where the interesting alignment of my work with inclusive hiring and employee ownership kind of overlap.
yeah.
People think providing access to jobs is a win no matter what, both sides of the aisles, all sorts of positive components, because down the road, we're going to need more workers. We're going to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I guess the other part, I love that sort of the thought of the carrot, right, of employee ownership is a great way to attract really good talent. The other part that sort of, I don't know, I also don't hear people speaking about a lot, like when it comes to that silver tsunami, is the impact that these retiring workers can have on the knowledge drain within the business. And if they don't have any they don't have any incentive to be able to really transfer that knowledge, then why would they? Right? They'll sit there. No, that's the owner's responsibility to do. But when they're an employee owner, their payouts over the next few years are dependent on the success of the company. It just aligns incentives for long-term thinking, like for looking after that next generation, so that they then look after you, right? There's just so much that just sort of is. It just shows sort of dignity towards each other, like and that ability to look after each other. It's just there's so many strengths to it.
I'll nod my head, and everyone now knows it, and it's in part, because of amazing work that has happened in the last 10 years to prove it with research. It's not even just hypothetical, which of course it makes perfect sense when you say it out loud. Yes, if I contribute to the success of the business and we're all sharing in that, maybe I'll work a little harder on it. But there's just hard facts right now. It can't be denied. These models work better, right?
Yeah, it's fantastic. What's your mission at 40 million owners? It's probably written in the title, but and how are you guys going about it?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It is in there, and it is to bring ownership to the 40 million employees that we see working in the lower middle market. And we are particularly driven by the impact that can be made in the lower middle market, where most often now these are a lot of the silver tsunami baby boomer business owners that own small businesses. And how do we both set an example of what's possible with some of our work in investing and deploying capital, but also just raise awareness like you're doing, right? In each of these conferences that we attend, and when we get into our communities, our EO communities, it's clear we need to just make people more aware, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in part, there's a big piece around 40 million owners that says there is a transfer of wealth that is going to happen. And we need to think about how to make those business owners aware that it's going on, but even the employees that might be able to share stories that they'd like to be part of an employee-owned business in the future. And then the big realization that we had as we've been doing some of this work is current ESOPs make amazing acquirers of businesses. The easiest way, perhaps, if you're a business owner to transition to employee ownership is to be bought by an existing employee-owned business.
Yeah.
And, helping to be part of that ecosystem, certainly right now, when, these folks are thinking about, hey, how can I best use the cash on my balance sheet? How can I create more value within my current ESOP? We really see a great opportunity, and certainly we aren't the first ones to talk about this. Corey Rosen and then CEO has been speaking about existing transitions or existing acquisitions within ESOPs actually being a bigger driver of new employee owners than the actual formation of new ESOPs. And I want many, many more new ESOPs to be formed.
Yeah.
I think driving kind of an acquisition strategy within ESOPs is going to be impactful work also, and we're energized to do it. And the last piece I'll say about that is the opportunity to compete effectively in a market-based environment when a business is already in auction needs to be a big piece of EO. All right. Mm-hmm. Expecting owners to be able to just step out of their day-to-day work and say, hey, I want to create an employee-owned structure and transition. Yes, absolutely, that should happen. But they're being approached by brokers and others day after day, and it's easy for them to say yes to that. And then we have to make it easy when they're in market and in a process to say, oh, here's your option now. Let's go ahead and, we can be equally competitive, and you can get a great return on your business and also do something really meaningful when you sell it.
Yeah, look, just on that, but you've at the moment you tend to find aligned sellers, because it's the only people who really want to be bothered to do the cultural change are the ones who really want to sort of focus on that legacy, because it does take time, it does take effort. That's why I love that the acquisition by ESOPs. It's sort of it takes that away from that sort of that retiring seller, but yeah, it's a big challenge for a lot of companies to be able to overcome.
It's an appreciation of what it takes to run a successful small or medium-sized business. You are busy every day, you know, and the luxury of taking a step back and saying, okay, how am I going to do succession planning? That's a luxury. And, when the comment says, oh, which I believe 100%, most businesses haven't done a succession plan. I don't like it to ever sound like a critique, because these folks are running their businesses. They are making it successful. They're meeting payroll. They're doing what needs to be done to make the business successful. And then when the time comes to stop, they're ready to stop. And having easier mechanisms or clear mechanisms for EO in those situations is what I'm energized to make sure is happening.
If we're pulling on that thread a little bit, what do you see? Because there you talked about an owner who's running their business really, really, like they're working hard. They're driving a lot of the meetings. They're driving customer conversations, operations. They've probably got their finger everywhere. That probably also doesn't align for a business that's able to really survive without them. So, what do you see as the biggest challenges for a company to adopt an employee an owner mindset?
I'll answer it one way, and if I don't get to it, we'll come back to it. But I think the piece, and this I need to give credit to my colleague at Southeast Acquisition Capital, Michael Morosi, who's been working around these models now for many years. An effective employee ownership transition needs to have some capital that can fill in any gaps that are necessary and work on behalf of transitioning into a good capital stack. It also needs to bring an operator or ensure the operator is in place. because exactly what you say, these businesses of this size, the owner may be retiring, might not be happening immediately, but there needs to be some clear path to say who's going to run this thing and who's going to make it work. And you
Yeah.
need to bring the operator, and it energizes myself as an operator and as someone that would be energized around how do you create the cultures and how do you develop organizations to become even more productive when a longtime leader steps aside or someone new comes into place. That's a key component of these transitions. And we need to make sure
Mhm.
when we talk about it that I think, as you were saying, there's not some assumption that there's somebody that's going to come and just run this thing. No, you need
Yeah.
to solve for that, right? You need to be ready.
Yeah. And so when you mentioned the capital, was the capital that you mentioned, was that for more to sort of plug any holes in the future running of the business, or to provide an exit?
Every exit needs to be market based. Like we
Yeah.
need solutions that allow for that to happen. And the conversations, and now there's some policy work around improving the simplicity of an ESOP so there isn't as much seller financing required, and bringing in what might be some federal legislation that can fill those gaps. I mean, there is so much creativity, and one of the things that energizes me about our movement and the folks that you bring on is there's just a ton of innovation. Right? There's
Yeah.
innovation in the financing side. There's innovation around the culture of ownership on the operating side, all in kind of service to how we can make these models more effective. Um, and I think it's because of what you had said before. It's clear they're better. They work. Like, why wouldn't I put my money into these things? And
Yeah.
it's up to us to put the structures out there and make sure we're able to do the work on the ground.
So going back, like looking at you mentioned there that we need to have this operator in place who's going to be able to create that culture of employee ownership. But like, what do you see as the core elements of that culture?
I think I can draw on my experience. You mentioned it as the carrot, right? There's something about accountability that needs to be in place in a workforce, and we can call it an ownership culture. We called it inclusive hiring at Greyston, where
Mm-hmm.
people just cared that if the product went out the door, it wasn't going to cause a problem or framed in a positive, right? It was going to be received in the most positive light. And being clear on how you can do that, right? It's easy to say that. It's how do you establish those cultures, right? And frontline managers are so important in that. The way you onboard people and communicate what your values are, it's so critical.
Yeah.
And I want to shout out some work that I'm really impressed by at KKR and Pete Stavros in their recognition around empathy in leadership,
Mm-hmm.
and that empathy can be a learned trait. And being able to walk in people's shoes is very hard, but learning how to think and understand and listen to people and know they're going to have solutions. That was something that came to me not early in my career, but it's a great thing. And I think there are leadership skills that are unique to employee ownership, and we will develop those, and they'll be critical to the long term success.
Yeah, I listened to an interview with Pete Stavros recently talking about that about empathy in leadership. It was fantastic to hear, and not something that in my work with private equity I've heard a lot of.
I mean, he's looking for all the ways to do value creation,
Yeah.
and I'm a fan. It's if leaders need to be more empathetic, let's figure out how to make them or help them to become that way. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, there is somewhat of a bias, probably a selection bias of those that lean into employee ownership, but we need to be able to find others that might be interested, are great operators, and we have to juice the empathy element, if you will.
Very much so. So, when you're talking about the work of 40 million owners, you talked about the lower mid market. What could you define the lower mid market?
uh, I could, but then the next person that joins will also define it slightly different. So we kind of think about it in tranches, if you will. Maybe
Okay.
maybe enterprise value in the $3 to $6 or $7 million range, and then
Okay.
enterprise
Yep.
value in the $8 to $50 million range, and that could be kind of certainly the lower of the lower middle market, depending on how you
Yep.
talk to. But it comes in some ways around how we think about when people are going after buying these businesses, who's going to be the competitive set. And kind of in the lower middle market, that's where the search funds are taking off. And there's a lot of activity around those investment strategies. And you're going to come across people in that competitive set. And maybe in the larger size, you need to think about how to bring in the ESOP structure, but you're going to need some other junior capital providers in there in your capital stack to make it work. And who else are you going to be up against in that perhaps competitive environment with an independent sponsor? Or this is where some private equity players may be coming into the mix. And, we think there are going to be amazing EO offerings out there, and folks like Apis and Heritage are leading the way and being competitive and making things happen. And, I'm excited to see how it's all developing.
I mean, 8% brings up a great point. They've obviously 80 million. They had their first fund, which has been successful. It's already been deployed at 80 million. I think you mentioned to me they're going to deploy 250 million. But usually with fund economics, and said, I don't know what their plan is for the second fund, but usually when like PE firms or even VCs, they when they raise a bigger fund, they tend to write bigger checks. They're still writing the same amount of checks with just bigger numbers on them. Which takes them out of the market, like the lower mid-market. I mean, how are you guys going to maintain your focus at 40 million owners on that lower mid-market?
Well, two ways. I love the space, right? And so we want to be pioneers in how we invigorate things happening there. But in being a pioneer, ideally, we're educating many, many others to follow on our path, like Apis and Heritage will for others, right? If they move up market, others will move behind them and continue to do these deals. And as you said, and I agreed in early days, there's going to be just such opportunity, and that draws people into the market. And so if we can demonstrate a variety of different ways to do successful deals in the lower middle market and inspire ESOPs to be more acquisitive and show how, I guess the part that your podcast is created to do, but to show selling business owners that there are options out there and they should go looking for them, right? Yeah. And they should, when they're selling, ask the buyer, whoever it might be, hey, do you have an employee ownership strategy? And if you don't, could you talk to Mike over here at 40 million owners? Because he'll tell you his, right? Or, call up Andy. He's had all the experts on, Yeah. So I want us to get to that point, right? Where the owners or someone along the way is saying, hey, I like you. Your structure doesn't have employee ownership. Can you integrate it in?
Yeah, I love that. It's having people, I mean, the awareness is obviously key to be able to drive that. And then also like the capital that supports that. I mean, it still amazes me that the UK is having such amazing growth with the EOT, but a large majority of that is still seller financed, which is phenomenal. I mean, what are the barriers that you're seeing to financing EO transitions in the States?
That certainly comes up all the time, and for good reason, right? I mean, you have run a successful business for whatever period of time, and then to be asked to say, you're keeping some skin in the game, and some is fine, but the levels that are necessary, I pause on it because it's kind of the same thing we've been talking about, but just awareness of the options. It's hard, and I've yet to be in a conversation with a retiring owner when you introduce the idea of employee ownership that they don't at least pause for a moment and say, oh, wait a second. I thought I explored that, 3 years ago. It was going to be too complicated, and now I'm down this path. I didn't think I could do it anymore. But the reality is it's never too late, right? Yeah. And we need to get those stories out there. So, and it needs to be market based, right? It needs to be competitive in the market. The seller financing for certain owners and leaders is fine because they know how the business is, that it aligns with their timeline. But for those that it doesn't, we need to allow them to exit without having to bear that piece.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense of getting that alignment. Like in terms of how do you at 40 million owners, are you guys providing that capital and operator, or is that the work that you do more driving awareness?
A couple different things. Certainly awareness, and then as owners consider the options, it's a bit of the quarterbacking of the process.
Okay.
And there are many, 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 many better experts out there for a lot of the issues with the folks that we're talking about. But knowing how to access them and doing it efficiently, that's what we want to do. And I think there is an opportunity to do more of it. And that's how we see 40 million owners growing and just having the kind of impact I hope we can have.
Yeah, nice. Well, I think having that single source of truth for these owners or that single point of contact is just so amazing. Like because I'll sit there and they've got their private sort of personal wealth planner, they've got their business accountant, they've got their lawyer who probably has been reasonably good at sort of doing their commercial contracts, who might be advising on this. They've got this sort of portfolio of people who aren't able to come together and really provide them the right advice at that point in time. So having someone, it's sort of akin to a bit like, healthcare. Like if you get sort of get a symptom, someone's really good at, one doctor's really good at solving that one particular symptom. But when it comes to actually understanding holistically what's the best solution, you might need to get all these different types of advisors. And so having an advocate for a great solution, I think it makes a lot of sense, Mike. I can see it being incredibly valuable.
Great. Let's hope so. And I mean, people want to suggest, those that aren't familiar with employee ownership may steer owners away from it. But I want to believe it's just that people aren't familiar with the options. And the more we can inform those professional service providers and everybody in the ecosystem that are looking to provide great advice about the innovations in the market, the more it's going to evolve.
Yeah, very much so. So what do you see as the biggest challenges for employees transitioning to employee ownership in the mid-market, in that lower mid-market space?
It's changing mindset, right? The idea of owning equity or being an owner in a business is certainly different than walking in every day and just expecting someone to tell you what to do, which certainly still happens, right? And then in that kind of environment, it's a long-term journey, I think, to create a culture like we had at Greyston and those in some of the best employee ownership environments where people feel comfortable speaking out and saying, hey, this could improve, right? I could eliminate some percentage of scrap if we did this kind of thing, and feeling comfortable saying it. It's, I think, empowering that and building trust within cultures, which is, long before employee ownership or anything, it's always been talked about as a core component of a great culture. And I think that comes in any number of ways. One of the things that I've always been successful with is transparency around how does the business operate. This is how you could be held accountable. These are the inputs. This is the output. This is how long it's taking us. Can we change any of these things? And really soliciting answers and advice and giving a forum to talk about it. It sounds simple, but in reality, people will be apprehensive the first many, many times it happens until they start seeing, oh yeah, remember last quarter we actually did this and Debbie said this and then Mike did it. And look at that. Now we're all benefiting. And when there's shares or dollars or something that then ends up in your pocket, you're like, yeah, this is going to be good. Maybe I need to think about it. And I'll frame it in the work of Bernie Glassman, which because I love this, and rarely in business do you hear the word love, but the concept of loving action, it's not so much that it's not about loving your team member, but it's about taking the time to ensure your team member understands what it means to do a good job. And it's throughout the entire organization. So from the board down to me, from me to my team members, from me to the earliest apprentice, uh, and amongst the apprentices that says, hey, if you see someone that might not be doing something the way it needs to get done, take the time, right? Make the time, because it's so
Yeah.
easy to just walk past, right? And be like, oh, I got my own things, I'm doing this. But Bernie and his approach was always about, no, it's about that team member feeling good, feeling empowered to be successful. If the label needs to be turned a little bit, take the time to do that. And that loving action culture kind of just percolated through the entirety of the business and the environment, and always looking to say, hey, wait 1 second, and then you receive it in all the right ways also. So I had always just believed in that approach, and how it creates a culture that really just drives performance.
Yeah, I think giving permission on both sides, I think it is so amazing, because it just, I guess, widens the aperture for growth opportunity, which gives people so much pride as long as it's done in the right way. I think that's sort of where a lot of those sort of command and control sort of models of management really sort of fail people, because they're just not human, and people don't know what they've opted into. Whereas here, it seems like, oh, look, this is just how we're going to run the business.
Yeah, and it's a blend, of course, because there are decisions that need to be made in the command and control structure, but how do people influence and feel comfortable? I mean, I think you stated it perfectly.
I just want to sort of touch something that you mentioned is when you talked about that sort of lower mid-market and the potential for increased competition of buyers coming into that space. I mean, the likes of Cody Sanchez, Alex Hormozy, the Carl Allens, the Walker Dybulls, like all these guys guys and girls are really driving the entrepreneurship through acquisition. Do you see those people, and sort of search funds as well for those people who've done sort of the MBA version of that? But do you see those people being the main competition in that market?
Certainly, they're the competition. They're looking, it will be growing. Like, these are great businesses. It's a great lifestyle to run one of these businesses. I think some of my work is, yes, when I may be wanting to also own that business, I'll think of them as competition, but I want to also encourage us to think of them as people on the learning journey. And as we all do, we believe employee ownership is better. So these folks ought to be integrating employee ownership into how they're developing their deals and how they're encouraging growth in the market. And, won't it be great when it's not just myself and my colleagues with the only employee ownership, term sheet in the mix, and everyone has some kind of employee ownership structure? That's really what we're working for. So if there is an environment of co-opetition that can evolve, where whoever wins the next deal, there's some element of employee ownership. Now we're into, a great vision for the future.
Well, Mike, that's a great place. That's a great place to end sort of the bulk of the conversation. But I'd like to finish with just a fast round of questions, where I'm just going to ask you 3 quick questions and you offer a quick response. How does that sound?
Yes.
All right.
Please.
Who is the leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
Yeah. Of course, I've listened to your podcast and so many amazing leaders, and I love Corey Rosen, but I'm going to go a little different because I'm so impressed by Allison Lingane and her work at Project Equity, but then her continued work with Ownership Capital Lab, and her realizing that there's something else that she wants to solve for. And it is hard to, having run a nonprofit, to pivot and move. And I'm a huge fan of what she does and who she is and what she's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And an incredibly generous woman with her time. And I'll link, she's a prior guest, friend of the pod. I'll link to her show. Okay, so then what is your favorite resource on employee ownership?
Yeah, I got to go with NCEO and a close second to Rutgers. If I want to give a shout out also to Transform Finance in their Learning Hub, it's a really great set of tools to get a primer on what employee ownership is all about.
Okay, really cool. And then the last one, what would you say to a retiring owner who's sitting on the fence about a transition to employee ownership?
I'd ask him or her, do you want to make a lot of money in the short term or leave a long-term legacy? And regardless of the answer, it's employee ownership.
Yeah. I love that. Sending them down a one-way path. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time for joining and sharing your story today. It's been great to have you on the podcast.
Hey, Andy, I appreciate all that you're doing and the chance to talk.
Cheers, mate. Thanks again. Speak soon. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.